She finally whispered the words I'd been afraid to hear, and everything changed. The rain had been falling all morning, gentle but persistent, washing the city streets in a silver sheen that reflected the muted glow of streetlights. He stepped into the small cafe on the corner, the bell above the door announcing his arrival with a soft chime. Inside, the air smelled warm, freshly brewed coffee, baked pastries, and the faint scent of vanilla from candles flickering on a few tables. It was quiet, almost comforting, as if the world outside had been paused for a moment. He noticed her immediately. She sat near the window, a book open in front of her, the cover slightly worn at the edges. She was striking, not in an overwhelming way, but in the kind of presence that made a room feel calmer, simply because she was there. Her hair, dark with subtle streaks of silver, fell softly around her shoulders, framing a face that was both confident and quietly reflective. She wore a simple sweater, the kind that hinted at comfort and taste rather than fashion, and a faint smile tugged at her lips as her eyes followed the lines on the page. He moved to the counter to order, trying to appear casual, but he found his gaze drifting back to her more than once. There was something about the way she tilted her head, the way her fingers traced the rim of the coffee cup absent-mindedly, that made his chest tighten in a way he couldn't explain. As he turned to find a table, their hands brushed briefly, an innocent accident as she reached for sugar, and he felt a spark, subtle but undeniable, travel up his arm. She looked up at him then, eyes meeting his for a fleeting second. There was nothing overt in her expression, just a calm acknowledgement, but it left him unsettled in the best possible way. He chose a table across the room, close enough to notice the small details he hadn't dared to observe before. The soft curve of her cheek when she smiled, the gentle way she adjusted the book in her hands, the quiet sigh she let out when a page didn't hold her attention. Each small motion felt intimate, almost as if he were witnessing a private moment she hadn't meant to share. And yet, there was no tension, no rush, just a quiet rhythm that drew him in. As he sipped his own coffee, he wondered what it would be like to strike up a conversation. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the subtle weight of her presence, the way she seemed both approachable and untouchable, or maybe it was the quiet understanding that some things are meant to be observed first, felt before they are spoken. Still, he couldn't deny the pull, the curiosity that lingered long after he took his first sip. By the time he left the cafe, the rain had softened to a drizzle. He walked past the window one last time, and for the first time in a long while, he felt that quiet stirring, the kind that promised something unexpected. She looked up as he approached, a flicker of recognition in her eyes, and a small, polite smile tugged at her lips. The way she held herself, upright yet relaxed, made him aware, suddenly, of the quiet confidence she carried effortlessly. He offered a nod, and she gestured toward the empty space beside her, inviting him to sit. Their conversation began casually, at first just light remarks about the weather, the lingering scent of rain, the peacefulness of the park. But soon, they were sharing tastes in music and books, small confessions that felt intimate despite their brevity. Every time he laughed at one of her subtle jokes, he noticed how her eyes crinkled at the corners, the warmth of her expression making the space between them feel smaller. There was a moment, a brief, accidental brush of hands as she reached for her coffee thermos. Their fingers touched, lingered, and then recoiled slightly, though neither made an obvious move away. The electricity in that touch was undeniable, a silent acknowledgement of the tension neither wanted to voice. He felt the warmth of her skin for a heartbeat longer than necessary, the faint pressure of her hand against his sending a ripple through him that lingered long after their contact ended. A stray gust of wind lifted a lock of her hair, letting it fall against his shoulder. Instinctively, he reached out and brushed it back behind her ear, his fingers trembling slightly with the unexpected intimacy. Her eyes met his again, softer this time, and for a fleeting moment, it felt as though the world around them, the chirping birds, the rustling leaves, the distant hum of traffic, had fallen away. Only the two of them existed in that space, connected by small, weightless gestures that carried more meaning than words ever could. Yet beneath the warmth of the moment, hesitation lingered. He wondered how much she noticed, whether she felt the same pull he did, and whether he was imagining it all. She seemed calm, composed, almost impervious to the undercurrent of longing between them, and he wrestled with the fear that this was only in his own mind. Still, the undeniable truth remained. The closeness, the brush of hands, the accidental touch, had left an indelible mark on him. He arrived to find the place bathed in the warm glow of late afternoon sunlight spilling through sheer curtains. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and her perfume, a delicate floral note that lingered like a whisper. It was cozy, intimate, the kind of space that immediately put him on edge in a way he didn't expect. She greeted him with a soft smile, and for a moment, just the sight of her made his chest tighten. There was a quiet confidence in the way she moved, graceful, assured, but something in. As they worked, they began talking more freely, laughing at small mishaps, a leaning stack of novels that threatened to topple, a misplaced bookmark, a faintly ridiculous book title that neither could take seriously. His heart fluttered each time she laughed, the sound soft and sincere, like sunlight filtering through leaves. He noticed the subtle way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, or the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, and every small gesture felt intimate, charged with a quiet tension he couldn't ignore. Then it happened, an accidental touch. As he reached to hand her a heavier book, their fingers brushed. Neither withdrew immediately. Instead, he felt a subtle thrill, an almost imperceptible heartbeat that seemed to synchronize with hers. She gave him a look, soft and unguarded, as though acknowledging the spark without speaking aloud. It was brief, but enough to make him acutely aware of the space between them, now charged with possibility. They paused for a moment, leaning on the shelf, catching their breath after laughing over a particularly precarious stack. The proximity was intoxicating. He could feel the faint warmth radiating from her body, the rhythm of her breathing, and the gentle curve of her shoulder brushing against his. It was a small, everyday closeness, but for him, it was electric. A quiet, unspoken connection had taken root. As the task ended, she offered him tea, and they sat side by side on the couch, the quiet hum of the city outside their window, a soft backdrop. He noticed the faint scent of the tea mingling with her perfume, and the way she settled into the sofa, relaxed yet attentive, gave him a strange, comforting sense of belonging. Their conversation drifted to books, dreams, and fleeting memories of childhood, and he realized that he was seeing a side of her few people ever witnessed, thoughtful, tender, and quietly reflective. By the time he left, he felt the pull of their connection stronger than ever. It was more than attraction. It was curiosity, care, and the subtle awareness of being seen by someone who understood him in a way he didn't expect. That afternoon had shifted something between them, laying the first stones of the path neither could yet name, but both were drawn to follow. It was a late afternoon when he found himself at her apartment again, this time without any task to excuse his presence. The golden light of the setting sun spilled through the half-open curtains, casting long shadows across the room and giving everything a soft, intimate glow. She had made tea, the gentle steam rising in thin spirals, carrying the comforting scent of chamomile and honey. He noticed the subtle details, the way she arranged the cups on the table, the way her fingers lingered over the teapot handle, small gestures that spoke volumes about her care and attention. They sat together, not too close but not too far either, the kind of distance that invited conversation, yet left room for quiet observation. For the first time, she spoke of something heavier, something she rarely shared, the heartbreak of a past relationship that had left her hesitant to trust again. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, and there was a tremor in her hands as she cradled her cup. She looked at him, eyes brimming with honesty, as if testing whether he could truly see her. Not the composed exterior, but the woman underneath. He listened, completely present. Every word she spoke seemed to echo in the quiet room, and he found himself leaning in, drawn by the rawness of her emotion. When she paused, unsure how much to reveal, he instinctively reached for her hand, covering it with his. Her skin was warm and slightly trembling, and he felt the subtle pulse of her heartbeat under his fingers. It was a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of unspoken understanding, a quiet promise that she was safe to be seen, to be vulnerable. The air between them shifted in those moments, charged with intimacy that had nothing to do with romance in the conventional sense, yet everything to do with connection. He could sense her hesitation, the wall she had carefully built over the years, and yet there was a flicker of trust there, a willingness to let him in. She leaned just slightly toward him, not enough to invade the space, but enough that he could feel her presence more keenly. It was a closeness that stirred something deep inside him, a mixture of protectiveness, admiration, and a quiet, unspoken desire. They spoke little after that. Words were unnecessary. He simply let her speak when she needed, offered a reassuring squeeze of the hand, a nod, the faintest smile when she laughed softly at her own memories. Every small gesture mattered. Every touch was a tether that drew them closer, emotionally if not physically. The room felt warmer, safer, cocooned in the glow of mutual understanding and the quiet hum of the city outside. By the time he left, he carried with him a new awareness. This was no longer a casual curiosity, no longer a simple intrigue sparked by accidental touches or fleeting glances. He felt the beginnings of something far deeper, a connection forged in trust, in shared vulnerability, and in the quiet courage of two people daring to feel something real. The walls were no longer impenetrable, and he knew that the journey ahead, however uncertain, was one he wanted to take with her. It was one of those quiet, ordinary evenings that suddenly felt charged with anticipation. The young man had come over to help with a small errand, something as mundane as carrying. The soft hum of the city outside was muted by the thick walls of her apartment, leaving only the warm light spilling from the hallway, casting long, intimate shadows across the floor. She moved ahead of him, slightly off balance as she reached for a bag perched precariously on the top step. Without thinking, he reached out instinctively, steadying her by the elbow. Their eyes met in that heartbeat, wide and unguarded, and the brief physical contact sent an unexpected ripple through both of them. It was not a touch planned or orchestrated, just an instinct, a moment of real human connection. And yet, in its simplicity, it carried more weight than either had anticipated. He could feel the warmth of her arm against his, the subtle pressure as she leaned slightly into him for stability. There was a charged silence, the kind that fills a room without words, stretching seconds into an eternity. She looked up at him, her gaze soft but intense, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of desire. Not bold or urgent, but quiet, restrained, and incredibly compelling. Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again, leaving only the unspoken truth hovering between them. Every nerve in his body seemed attuned to her presence. He noticed the faint scent of her perfume, a soft floral note mingling with the faint musk of the city outside. The warmth of her skin against his own lingered, even after he stepped back slightly, a ghost of sensation that refused to fade. He realized, with startling clarity, that the connection they had been nurturing, through glances, casual touches, and shared moments, was no longer subtle. It had become a tangible, undeniable force. For a moment, neither moved. The room felt suspended in time. He wanted to speak, to acknowledge what both of them were feeling, but the words caught in his throat. She, too, hesitated, aware of the magnetic pull that drew them closer, but wary of crossing a line too soon. The tension was intoxicating, a quiet storm that had been building over days and weeks, now cresting in a single, electric touch. Finally, she exhaled softly, a laugh barely audible, and the moment diffused just enough for them to continue. But the unspoken truth lingered. Their relationship had shifted. It was no longer just curiosity or friendship. It had become something delicate, thrilling, and fraught with possibility. Every glance, every casual brush of a hand, would now carry the weight of this turning point. By the time he left that evening, the memory of her gaze, the warmth of her arm, and the silent electricity between them stayed with him. He knew that nothing could ever be quite the same. The turning point had arrived, not with a confession or a dramatic gesture, but in a quiet, intimate moment of human connection that changed the trajectory of both their hearts forever. It was a quiet evening, the kind where the city seemed to exhale and the world slowed just enough for private truths to surface. They had taken a walk along the tree-lined streets near her apartment, the golden streetlights reflecting softly off the wet pavement. The air carried the faint scent of rain on asphalt and the lingering perfume of her presence, subtle and warm, wrapping around him like a quiet invitation. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, each step deliberate, yet the air between them hummed with tension. He noticed how she adjusted her scarf against the cool night breeze, the motion casual, but her fingers lingered in a way that drew his attention. He was acutely aware of every detail: the sway of her hair, the soft cadence of her footsteps, the way the light caught her eyes and made them seem almost luminous in the dim glow. Finally, she stopped. The sudden pause made his heart beat faster, a quiet alarm of anticipation. She turned to face him, and for the first time he saw something raw, vulnerable, and entirely unguarded. Her eyes searched his, tracing the lines of his face as if memorizing them, and the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. Then she spoke, her voice low and tremulous, carrying the weight of truth she could no longer hold inside. "I can't keep pretending I don't feel this." The words hung in the night air, soft yet powerful, and he felt them resonate deep within him. It was a confession, yes, but also an invitation, a delicate offering of herself, of her heart, and of the possibility they had been circling for so long. He reached out instinctively, taking her hand in his. The warmth of her skin pressed against his, and he could feel the pulse of her heartbeat through her palm. Their fingers intertwined naturally, a perfect, quiet fit, as if they had been waiting for this moment without knowing it. His own chest tightened with a mix of relief and longing, the kind that makes time feel both infinite and impossibly short. For a long moment, neither spoke. Words felt unnecessary. Their silence was rich with unspoken understanding. She leaned in slightly, just enough to bridge the space between them, and he could feel the faint brush of her hair against his shoulder. The tension that had been building, through accidental touches, shared laughter, and quiet afternoons, was finally acknowledged, crystallized in a single, honest confession. Yet hesitation lingered. They both felt it, the awareness of the age difference, the uncharted territory of their feelings, the fragile line between desire and propriety. He saw it in her eyes, the flicker of uncertainty, and he felt it within himself, a mix of fear and hope that made his heart ache. Still, the confession had broken the barrier. The first step toward something real had been taken. As they stood there, hand in hand under the soft glow of the streetlights, a sense of quiet resolution began to settle between them. They didn't need to rush. They didn't need to speak of the future yet. For now, the acknowledgement of their feelings, the intertwining of their hands, and the shared heartbeat of that moment was enough. The turning point had arrived, and the path forward, though uncertain, felt suddenly possible. The weekend arrived quietly, unassuming, but it felt like a small sanctuary from the world outside. The young man arrived at her apartment to find her kitchen bathed in soft morning light, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm bread wrapping the room in a comforting embrace. She greeted him with a smile that seemed to hold the weight of their recent confessions, tender and unguarded. The tension that had built over weeks, sometimes thrilling, sometimes hesitant, had finally softened into something safe, intimate, and profoundly real. They spent the morning together in simple domesticity. He watched as she stirred the coffee slowly, her hands moving with practiced grace, and he felt a quiet joy in the ordinary rhythms of her presence. She caught his gaze across the counter, and they exchanged a small, knowing smile, the kind that spoke of shared secrets, unspoken understanding, and the deep comfort of being fully seen. When he reached for the sugar jar, their fingers brushed, lingering for just a heartbeat, and he felt the familiar spark of warmth that had drawn him to her from the very beginning. After breakfast, they settled on the couch with a blanket draped across their laps. She rested her head lightly on his shoulder. Her hair they read together, exchanging thoughts on passages, laughing softly at shared observations, and occasionally leaning closer when a sentence sparked mutual amusement. It was unhurried, unforced, and utterly human, a perfect reflection of the slow-burn intimacy that had been building between them. In those moments, the age difference that had once felt like a barrier seemed to fade entirely. Experience and youth, caution and curiosity, past heartbreak and fresh hope, all of it intertwined seamlessly in the small, quiet gestures of care and attention. He brushed a loose strand of hair from her face, and she responded with a faint smile, her fingers lightly tracing his hand in return. Every touch, every glance, was deliberate yet gentle, a reaffirmation of trust and affection that needed no words. Later, they walked together in the soft afternoon sun, hands intertwined, the city around them alive but distant. People passed by, unaware of the significance of each glance, each subtle touch, but that didn't matter. They had created their own small world, one defined not by societal expectations or the opinions of others, but by mutual respect, emotional honesty, and quiet devotion. By evening, as the city lights flickered on and the sky deepened to a soft indigo, they returned to her apartment, still holding hands. She rested her head against his chest as they sat together on the couch, the kind of silence between them that was comfortable and full of meaning. The connection that had begun with chance encounters, accidental touches, and quiet confessions had blossomed into something enduring, tender, and deeply intimate. In that moment, they both understood something essential. Love didn't need to be rushed, nor did it require grand gestures to prove itself. It existed in the small, deliberate moments, the brush of a hand, the shared laugh, the quiet presence beside each other. And in those simple, human moments, they found everything they had been searching for all along.